Welcome to IFES' Dialogues on Democracy. I'm Editorial and Communications Manager Adam Gallagher. In 2005, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf won the presidency of Liberia, becoming the first elected woman head of state in Africa. 12 years later, with the Nobel Peace Prize to her name, President Johnson Sirleaf will leave office as African women still face many challenges to participating in political processes. While her election was heralded as a breakthrough for women in politics, advances for African women have been uneven. IFES works to fortify women in political and electoral processes as candidates and elected leaders, technical experts in elections, engage civil society leaders, and inform voters. In this episode of Dialogues on Democracy, IFES Senior Gender Specialist Gabrielle Bardall talks with Africa Deputy Regional Director Laurie Cooper about the state of women in politics in Africa, the challenges and opportunities to their full participation, and IFES's women's empowerment work on the continent.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle. Welcome to Laurie. So let's get started with our talk. Broadly speaking, how would you assess the situation for African women in politics since Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was elected 12 years ago?
I wanted to maybe step back and look at how African women in politics matches up with the rest of the world. And according to through the Interparliamentary Union and UN Women in Politics index that they've been collecting since approximately since 1995, we currently have 11 heads of state and 12 heads of government who are women. What I wanted to focus on, having started out with that, is that the time frame we're talking about is from 2005 to 2017. This is the first year that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was elected, and of course she's at the end of her term now. Worldwide, in 2005, an average of 15% of combined legislatures, so that's the upper house and lower house, those were women formed 15% of those legislatures. Right now, in the world, the average is about 22.8%. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's actually 23.6%. So I'd say the continent as a whole, or the subcontinent, is keeping pace more or less with world trends. In Liberia specifically, outside of the president, in 2006, women comprised 12.5% of the combined legislative body. In 2017, however, the proportion was down to 7.7%. Just to stick with Liberia, we also think about 2005 to now as Liberia's first era of peace in a while. Rwanda is also in its era of peace after the genocidal conflict. And just for comparison's sake, their quota or their percentage of women in the legislature is 61.3%, so much higher than Liberia. That said, Rwanda is one of many countries in sub-Saharan Africa that uses quotas to assure seats of women in the legislature. Different states or different countries will use different formulas within the electoral law or political parties law to achieve this representation. Sometimes it's in the legislature itself. Other times it's within the political party composition and the determination of how to, for example, if they want to present a list of candidates, making sure that a certain number of those lists, the members of those lists are women. And so you'll have different outcomes, and I think all of that feeds into the proportion of women in the legislature is the proportion of women who are active in politics. So overall, I think I would cap the discussion of women in politics as saying that there has been some improvement. We have more women competing for higher political offices than there were a decade or 12 years ago.
That's great. Thank you. You raised some really important points there. A lot of encouraging news from the continent about the presence of women increasing over time, but also recognizing that the presence of women in numbers only is not enough to constitute real participation and meaningful participation and democracy. So what would you describe as some of the major barriers to African women's participation in politics and electoral processes today? And also, what opportunities do they have that they might not have had in previous decades, for example, when Mrs. Sirleaf took office?
Well, I think the main challenge, main barrier, not just for sub-Saharan African women, but all who want to enter politics, is capital and access to capital. Particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, if women don't own assets that they can liquidate, and in some countries we know that women are considered still property, so then they face challenges, significant challenges in getting noticed, much less endorsed by a political party. And in those cases where, for sake of quotas, or let's just say positive thinking on the part of political parties, where they want to cultivate women leaders, this doesn't really go far enough to protect women who are attacked on traditional or cultural grounds, or the parties don't necessarily go far enough to support women whose lifestyle makes it kind of complicated to run a campaign in the way that men traditionally have. And by that I mean crisscrossing the country for rallies, being away from home for extended periods of time, or being available to constituents at all hours. Other people. So, but again, I'd say that if these same women had significant capital, if they were bringing it to the party, supporting the campaign, pillars in the community, then I think that those particular modes of attack are less of an issue. And in terms of what some of the opportunities are, I think that particularly the definition of inclusion to encompass what we traditionally thought of as gender, but it refers to any kind of population that is, for various reasons, marginalized from full, let's say, political participation. That expanded definition of inclusion it has worked its way into electoral reforms, political party reforms that we've seen over the past decade, such that the presence of women, or the presence of women, is no longer seen perhaps as the threat that it once was. So that's something that I think is very positive. And as more women are entering the workforce, more women are again owning their own businesses. Potentially they are able to gain that kind of access that I was talking about before. Those two things together represent some new opportunities for women that maybe didn't exist before.
Great, thank you. So you've mentioned some significant challenges and opportunities, some of them being material and technical related, others being cultural. How is IFES's Africa programs addressing these challenges and seeking to empower women today?
Well, there's a number of things that I could just sort of maybe pick out a couple of gems. In Liberia, for example, the work that we've done with the National Electoral Commission has been all about gender mainstreaming at all levels, including civic and voter education, making sure that a message that appears to be generic, maybe not generic for the population that you're trying to reach. In Kenya, particularly for this most recent event, the identification of violence against women and the incidents of violence against women, particularly during election season, that is an area that IFES is highlighting by having developed a mechanism for a hotline, and then printing that hotline number on T-shirts, on bags, on numbers, or on any number of materials. When an incident happens, women are able to make phone calls anonymously and let the operators on the other end of the phone know what is happening to them. And I think this is very powerful. It speaks to the, as we say, the other side of elections and barriers to women's political participation. There have been roundtables, and I'm saying this over the past decade, roundtables and campaigns specifically targeting women in leadership positions, supported by IFES in Burundi, Cote d'Ivoire, DRC. I like things alphabetically. Guinea, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and South Sudan. So sometimes in cooperation with our partners, the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute, and also as a standalone basis.
That's great. Well, there's some really wonderful initiatives going on, and I thank you so much for taking the time to share them with us.
Thanks very much for having me.
For more on how IFES promotes democracy around the world, please visit www.ifes.org.